I'm sure. Couldn't help without getting the recording message in there. No,
I do that every time.
Now, I'm
like, oh, he's talking. I've got to do something. I've got to record it.
glad we got the recording now rather than 5 minutes into John Rhoderick's talk. At any rate, guests, members of the association, board members, welcome and thank you for joining us. As I was saying, I'm Charlie Leader. I've served as president of this association for the last 4 years. And giving the format that we've adopted, we're going to have our guest speaker today give his presentation first, followed by a business meeting to go over various things, upcoming elections, matters concerning our treasury, a wrap up of the New Water for New Mexico event, next month's speaker. So our guest speaker this month is John Rhoderick, who is the director of the Water Protection Division of the Environment Department. Get a load of this, folks. The things in his swim lanes, he's got a swim lane as wide as an Olympic pool. His responsibilities include overseeing Construction Programs Bureau, Drinking Water Bureau, Surface Water Quality Bureau, and the Groundwater Quality Bureau, which also takes care of Superfund Oversight, Mining Environmental Compliance, Pollution Prevention Section, and the Brownfields Program Section. So if you thought I was joking when I said his swim lane is the width of an Olympic pool, that's not an exaggeration. Congrats on somehow figuring out a way to keep 8 plates spinning at once with nothing crashing to the ground. John has been with the Environment Department for 16 years and previously serving as a district manager in the Environmental Health Bureau. Prior to coming to the Environment Department, he worked in local government overseeing public works maintenance, operations, and construction. Great little project that John and I did in the city of Grants back at the turn of the century. And before entering public service, he worked in environmental remediation at numerous CERCLA sites around the U.S. as a health and safety professional and project manager for an engineering consulting firm out of Utah. John will be briefing us today on the Environment Department's approach to regulating non-traditional sources of water, which could include brackish water, produced water from oil field production, and Mike Hightower's favorite, reclaimed wastewater from municipal treatment plants, the other produced water, as I refer to it. Would you all please welcome John Rhoderick and be good enough to share his screen somehow?
Charlie, thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here. You could have left out the time frame that we worked together. I try not to remember how many years it's been, but it's great to be here and visit with you folks. Let me go ahead and see if I can share this presentation.
I'm a geologist and not an engineer. I know the wrongs out in the field, but
okay.
Participate much in the discussion.
If we could ask everybody to mute, that would be great.
The request would have, you guys.
Okay. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Not yet.
We're able to see you, but not the screen.
Okay. Let me see what.
Here it comes.
Well, this is looking promising. There we go. Bingo.
Gosh, I love technology, and I forgot to bring a 13-year-old along to make this all work for me. So bear with me as we get going. As Charlie said, I'm the director of the Water Protection Division, and we do a couple of things. All of them seem to be wet. So with that, what I want to do today is just kind of give you an update on our current rulemaking and then talk about some recent developments that you may have heard about. So we have been working with Mike Hightower and the consortium on developing regulations for the use of treated produced water for some time. In last year's legislative session, the focus shifted a little bit because we got a lot of support and luckily financial support from the legislature to pursue all aspects of water reuse. And so we adjusted our focus a little bit to move forward with an initial rulemaking, what I'll call the phase one, that sets the framework for future rulemakings on water reuse and provided some specific clarity and guidance to industry with regard to what they could and couldn't do with produced water and treated produced water for uses outside oil and gas. So we started that off in September with an advisory committee meeting. They met twice, reviewed draft regulations. We had a public comment period that ran from November 1st and closed on December 1st. We're still tallying the comments from that. Prior to on November 30th, we had about 28 total comments. By the time we closed on December 1st, we'd racked up, I think our count's now at about 493, and they all came in on the last day. So it's been a little challenging. Our time frame to get this first round in place is we're looking to petition the Water Quality Control Commission that sets all of our regulations on December 29th, which is the last day this year that we can, to look at getting a hearing requested for April of 2024. The regulation, like I say, it creates a new section in our 20.6.2 New Mexico annotated code, which is going to be supplemental requirements for water reuse. And in this section, it's going to have portions on direct and indirect potable reuse, reclaimed wastewater, which is our water from wastewater treatment plants, industrial gray water, which is currently not allowed, produced water that falls outside the Oil Conservation Division jurisdiction, and desalination. Now, technically, desalination is not a reuse. It's going to be a new use, but we felt like this was the best place to put it. The committee that we used was made up of tribal governments, academia, economic development folks from around the state, the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Division, of course, the New Mexico Environment Department. We had industry folks there, and we had NGOs, environmental NGOs involved with this rulemaking because, quite honestly, we don't have time to fail. So we wanted to go forward with something that was generally acceptable to all concerned. The other thing that we're doing right now is we've engaged third-party engineering support to develop and assist us with these regulations for indirect potable reuse. We are engaging with NMSU to assist with desalination and another little project that we've opened up. We've brought on a public relations firm to do public outreach because the reality is half the battle with reuse of any kind is socializing it. Public perception is huge, and most times it's not the science that's the issue getting a reuse, it's how it's perceived by the public and how much of a battle you have to fight. So we're looking at what I'm calling, and my staff hates it, but what it is a rolling rulemaking, right? Phase one is in April. We continue, even as that's going on, beginning to flesh out the other sections of this with intentions to go back to WQCC with more in the latter part of 2024. The key reason for this rulemaking, and I'll stress why in a little bit, but our future rulemakings are intended to standardize and simplify the permitting processes for water reuse. It's important to know that we already permit reuse on case-by-case basis. For example, we have an indirect potable reuse facility in Rio Rancho that's been operating for some time that is permitted under our existing water quality regulations. And of course, when I say indirect, there's an environmental buffer where what they're doing is injecting the effluent after they treat it, and then 3/4 of a mile to a mile, they pull that water back out of the aquifer for use. And so they have that environmental buffer. But the water it has to be significantly treated before it's allowed to be reinjected. It's an expensive system, requires a lot of operators, high-level operators to run it, but it has been successful. We also have, of course, a brackish water desal project down in Alamogordo that has not been fully functional, but it is there. We have a direct potable reuse project in Cloudcroft that they've not been able to get off the ground yet, but it is doable. And we're currently working with Las Vegas, New Mexico, and their consultants on a direct potable use pilot project up there. So it's important to I think, understand that under our existing regulations, we can do a lot of these things, but it's advantageous both to industry and to the state and to our taxpayers to standardize this stuff and get away from what I'll call the boutique permitting process, where we're doing one-offs all the time. We need to get consistent. We need to provide that guidance to industry to be able to move forward. And that's one of the reasons for the rulemaking that this first phase was to help the oil and gas industry, who has issues dealing with their produced water, having them have some certainty on expectations and how they could move forward. Currently, the regulations will allow them to do pilot projects that are closed loop. So we don't allow discharge of any type of produced or treated produced water in a manner that's going to directly or indirectly impact groundwater or surface water. But we're trying to encourage, investment and movement on the part of industry to look at these industrial uses that can be done closed loop, whether it's cooling towers, various things. Which leads me then to this slide you're seeing right now. And you may have heard that the governor made an announcement in Dubai with regard to a strategic water supply program that is standing up. It's in the early stages. The intent is to provide an incentive to get industry to step up the game and to begin to come forward with some proposals for projects that are what I will call full circle projects. Okay. Full treatment train, where is critical, location is critical. How are you going to treat the water? What does it need to be treated to? We're working with academia and consultants to determine what those criteria are, what those levels are that we'll accept. But the idea is that if industry knows that they are going to be able to have a return on their investment, they'll move forward, and they're the ones that have the resources to do this kind of thing. And there's two big components to it. The one that I want to focus on today is the brackish water piece and desal. There is a significant amount of brackish water around the state in various places that can be tapped, and the technology is there to treat it, the levels where it can be used for not only industrial purposes, but with regard to brackish water, potentially it could be treated to a level where communities could look at using it as either a supply source for their potable water systems, or, it could be used for aquifer recharge, various different things. But the intent, again, is to incentivize private industry and private investors to be willing to step forward and propose projects and bring the technology up online at levels that that are going to make a difference, and then benefit the state because of our dwindling freshwater resources by augmenting those and making them go a little farther. And in some cases, it could literally be a life or death difference for areas of the state where they have not got access or losing access to groundwater, and it's their only source. They have to find other options. So we're looking at that. The proposals, we're developing the guidelines and proposals and things like that, looking at spring of 24 to roll that out and to hopefully begin to see some of these proposals come in. Again, we're working with NMSU to assist us in figuring out what those proposals need to look like, and then as we get them in, helping us evaluate those to make sure that the investment of the dollars that the governor is committing get us moved forward with regard to water reuse and make an actual difference here in the state with regard to our water supplies. It's a challenge. And if there've been a couple of press releases that have gone out, and in the press release, there's a link where you can get on a listserv where we're going to be forwarding updates as this moves forward. It's, as far as I know, this particular thing has not been done anywhere else in the country, although the advanced market commitment concept is used in pharmaceutical markets and other places quite often, but this is the first application we think has been seen here. And we're looking for full circles. We would like to see ideally a scenario where an industry partner has a process, has a plan to treat the water or desalinate the water, and then has in a near proximity a place for that water to be used, whether it be in industrial use. There's potential for this treated water to be utilized for hydrogen production so that we're not hitting our freshwater supplies. There's all different types of industrial uses that we think it can be used for. But part of the issue, of course, is infrastructure to move it around. And so that's why we're asking industry, who are quite honestly the experts on what they've got to deal with, to help find the full solution to this. The one caveat being, of course, that the levels it has to be cleaned up to are going to be set by the New Mexico Environment Department and enforced by the Environment Department. And that includes, any requirements as this is monitored. One of the fun pieces is that your supply water can change. And that means you've got to be very careful about monitoring it so that, you don't produce a substandard product and not find out about it until later on, in the system. That's not acceptable. So a lot of engineering controls and application of good science and industry standards to move us forward with this. As I say, we're looking at spring of next year to have the guidance documents and forms and processes ready to go, and looking forward to hopefully seeing some pretty substantial movement on the part of industry in the area of desal. There's a lot of value there, and a lot of science, but the key is what's it cost to do this and what makes it viable to implement. And we will be looking for some input. I fully anticipate engaging this group to get your input as well as we move forward with this. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. My contact information is there on the last slide. And I think, Charlie, I don't recall if I sent this to you or not. I'm happy to do so. If y'all want it.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yes.
John, thanks for that presentation. That's the best I've heard or seen over and above the newspaper. So can you provide that listserv link in the chat?
Yeah, let me see if I can do that here. I mean, unshare my screen and I'll try.
Maybe you could just send it to everybody in an email.
Yeah, that'll work.
So and I'm going to lay out a hypothetical scenario.
Okay.
I don't know that we've met, but I've been pretty involved with the desal. Mike Hightower and I founded this association 5 or 6 years ago. I've asked the last four governors, name me our natural resources. And it's oil, gas, and grazing. And I got to tell 4 governors right to their face, you're wrong.
Yep.
And they liked it. So we finally realized that we do have a natural resource here. We could pay Texas back in about 20 minutes if we put it all to heavy use. But imagine this, speaking from my real estate hat, we've got 100 acres somewhere that could be, quote, an industrial park. And we incorporated P&M with solar and perhaps even some wind and desal and wastewater treatment for the facilities that are sitting there, these potential large water or even minimal water facilities that are sitting there. Am I to understand, and I'm going to get a little granular, a 250,000 square foot manufacturer of whatever you want to call it, something that provides jobs as an economic development. The water, the total water that they use for everything from the manufacturing process to the cooling process to the waste to their bathrooms and sanitary. If that was desalinated water cleaned up to the potable levels they need, put through their systems, came out, and instead of going to the sewer, went to a wastewater reuse system that would, clean it up, recycle it, everything from ag to industrial if needed. Would this be something that would be appealing and paid for by some of this money?
Well, so first off, let me say that the concept you're talking about, this integration of all these different pieces,
Yes,
is exactly the concept we're looking for. Now, what I need to stress is that this money we're talking about, when we talk about this advanced market commitment, it is a commitment that the state would make to purchase the water, all right, from the facility that's treating it, the desal facility or whatever, and then
sell it to the
turn
user.
around and resell that to the user. Okay. This is the state's intent is not to fund the infrastructure and build it out. Although I'm going to now make a plug for my Construction Programs Bureau. Yes, we can do that with Clean Water State Revolving Fund money, and we can do it, for a government entity at 0.01% interest. For a private entity, it's a little bit higher than that. I think it's right at 1% now, or 1.5, but it's pretty cheap money.
Yeah, very.
So while the state is not going to necessarily incur the cost of construction, that's the whole issue. The way we beat the water challenges in this state, and I appreciate your comments about what our resources are, because from my standpoint, and I could be slightly prejudiced, the single most important resource we have in New Mexico is water, because if we don't have that, we don't have anything else. Nothing. Right? That's key to anything. So the concept, exactly where you're going with these integrated businesses, working together and having this conglomeration that meets all these various needs, is exactly the thought process we're looking for. Yes.
Well, I've had this thought process. You can ask most of these people that have put up with me for as long as they put up with me. This has been my vision, and I'm not an engineer. I'm not even a water guy to speak of. I'm a real estate broker, but I'm enamored with this stuff. So one thing you said, the state will sell it to the user. Will the state actually just give it to the water authority that's in that county or what have you, and then they will sell it? The state's not going to become a water company, are they?
I certainly hope not. I don't need that on my hat tree as well. And those are things that we're still working through right now, how that mechanism is going to work. There's been conversation about, well, okay, we purchase it, state engineer uses it to meet water compact, to do aquifer recharge. I don't know all of those details, but the intent is to incentivize getting this infrastructure in this industry up and running, because we know it's there, right?
Right. But the question is, who's going to distribute it and bill for it?
Well, and that's where in these proposals, this is going to require industry to partner up with some other folks to say, hey, we can do this, and this is how we think it's going to work.
This is PPP stuff. Big time.
Yep.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to go offline with you if you wouldn't mind sometime before the end of the year.
Happy to do that.
Thank you.
You bet.
John, a question I have here. We're very excited to see the Strategic Water Initiative proposal, and that it recognizes that we have these substantial amounts of brackish water, literally billions of acre feet around the state, in a generic sense, in 8 or 9 different basins. The problem is that we don't have the specifics about the constituents and the quality, the depth, at the location. How do you expect industry to respond to an RFP when there's such a lack of specificity? Seems like we're putting the cart way before the horse. We need to know how much and where and what's in there before it can be treated and then given sold to the state.
Well, I appreciate the question. It's a good point. And I see where, you can potentially say we're getting the cart ahead of the horse. The reality is we don't have time not to move this forward in a pretty big hurry. Okay. Even as we speak, New Mexico Tech is working on characterizing and quantifying all of our groundwater across the state. Matter of fact, I'm in Las Cruces now at a water leaders workshop where there's been a lot of presentations on that and what they're doing and the gaps and things like that. We realistically anticipate that industry is going to move first where they have a pretty good understanding of what it is that they're dealing with. We're hoping that in other areas, the advanced market commitment concept will incentivize them to be willing to, if need be, to drill some monitoring wells, to do some water quality sampling and things like that. The reality is the science is there to treat whatever's identified. It has a lot to do with cost, but science is not the issue. So yeah, we recognize that. And that's going to be one of the challenges, as these proposals begin to come forward, as we start looking at them. We're asking industry to help figure out how to solve some of these problems, but time is of the essence. With the caveat that we can't do something that's going to compromise our already thinly stretched freshwater reserves, right? We're not willing to do anything that's going to make that a bigger problem for us. So we're going to have to see how it develops. But
does this mean that the governor is willing to ask the legislature to provide funds up front to do this kind of investigation through New Mexico Tech or other academic institutions before, again, launching the process of getting industry commitments?
So last year the legislatures provided a significant amount of funding to New Mexico Environment Department for this, not for this specific effort, but water reuse as a whole. And they also provided funding to New Mexico Tech, the geology department, to expand this investigation and characterization. The Office of State Engineer was funded and is engaged in this as well. So there's a lot of moving parts trying to get this done. I think a key thing to note about the funding that she talked about, the $500 million, is that she's looking at severance tax to fund this, not general fund. So that's a little bit of a unique piece as well. And the bottom line is none of that money is going to get spent until we start to see some of those proposals. And then we're going to look at that, and it may be that we do have to fund some additional studies, based on areas. Again, we're breaking some new ground here, and I'll be the first to tell you that there is going to be some learning curve, but now is not the time to be bashful in this state about trying to do things. I have communities that are going to be getting dust out of their faucets in 10 years if we don't figure something out. And it may be that what we're talking about is strategically located desalination plants that will bridge that gap,
I'm going to have to play the role of moderator here simply because got a lot of questions coming in through the chat. And just to make sure that those that posed them, we were paying attention. I'm going to take a couple questions from the, about 3 questions from the chat, and then John Hawley, you're up next. Question number 1, and this is from Jerry Sullivan Graham. What will be the involvement of the state engineer's office with regard to identifying and approving the diversions of potential supply sources?
Good question. So at this point, and that's something we're working through with the state engineer as well, they don't, when it comes to brackish water, at least right now, there's not a right attached to that. Okay. And so they don't have a direct involvement, but we are actively engaged with them because they're looking at aquifer recharge and all kinds of things like that. And we have joint jurisdiction on it. And so they're playing a part in, you know, where does this make sense to do and what kind of quality would they need to have, although they're more concerned about quantity. You know, there's evaluation of whether there needs to be any changes to regulations in order to allow this water reuse and aquifer recharge and various things. So as I say, they're actively engaged with us and with New Mexico Tech in identifying, you know, what the brackish water resources are that are available, as well as our other water resources. And that relationship is going to build. One thing that has occurred over the last 3 or 4 years is that we have been engaged very heavily with OSC, ISC, and with the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department as sister agencies. There's more communication between us now than there's ever been. There's not typically not a week goes by that I don't have multiple meetings with them talking about various aspects of water, because we finally come to the realization that water is really important, and what happens anywhere in the state impacts everywhere in the state. And I would even go bigger and say that we live in a fishbowl. Anything that happens in the fishbowl, which is our planet, ultimately is going to affect us all. So we need to figure this out. But they are involved. You know, there hasn't been conversation started yet with regard to water rights associated with brackish water. I anticipate at some point that may happen. But right now, based on, you know, on what the regulations say and stuff, it is not considered usable, and so doesn't have a water right attached to it.
But can I add something there, Charlie? This is John D'Antonio. There's not a right associated with it just because the water has not been appropriated yet, and it's not been appropriated for beneficial use. So one of the keys to remember is all water in New Mexico belongs to the public. Produced water is excluded from that, obviously, and John, you know this, but you know, produced water being a byproduct of the oil and gas industry is governed by the Office of the OCD Conservation Division. And so once that water gets cleaned up and it's going to become available for beneficial use, it's going to be considered unappropriated water that's available for appropriation, which means there'll be required of an application for a place and purpose of use. And so it's you know, I'm excited about this because I think it's gonna give us, the state of New Mexico, a lot of opportunities, but there's still a lot of, the devil's in the details on how it's all going to get permitted. The speculation piece that the state engineer has dealt with over the years with respect to somebody coming in and just appropriating, you know, hundreds of thousands of, you know, a lot of, let's just say a lot of water, appropriating it. You can't actually do that unless you have contracts for off-takers and a place and purpose of use identified. And John, I think that's what you're talking about doing, right? Is creating that supply, but with contracts in place.
Right.
And so there's a lot to consider. There's a lot to do, but the state engineer's office has a different set of statutes on the brackish water, which has to be disconnected, and the aquifer has got to be 2,500 feet below the top of the aquifer's got to be 2,500 feet below. So typically it's even water that's going to be deeper than that in order for it to be, I guess, administered under those different statutes. And there's a lot of exceptions. So, yeah, I mean, I'm glad you've got the state engineer's office involved, John. I know that you guys have been talking, but it is exciting, but it's not an easy. It's not going to be an easy process to get it through and get it done. So, I'm going to
ask John D'Antonio and John, the speaker, to start the process. Let's say we have a taker, we have a location, we have the real estate, we have the well. What more than a notice of intent is the state engineer's office going to play? This developer or developers or companies, they have the land, they have the real estate, they have the user, they want us to plant a well here. Over and above the notice of intent to the state engineer's office and their response to it, what other rules or guidelines would one have to follow with today's regulations and requirements as they sit to at least start the process?
Well, if it's an exempt use, which there's several exempt uses now that are in the 72, 12, 25 through 28 statutes. The first thing is ownership issue, right? So you've got to clarify the source and who the ownership is. There's an NOI that's published, and then you have to identify within that NOI the place and purpose of use. And in many cases within the state, if you're not clear that it's exactly separate, there still could be some water rights required to offset the effects of that water. And we've found that through some of the wells on the west side of Albuquerque, and some that were used in the Bonita Lake area. So there's still a potential for acquiring offsetting water rights if there's still a hydrologic connection to an upper aquifer. Those have to be considered, but really that process is pretty easy on a deep aquifer. It's a 15-day notice process. You can go directly to district court if anybody opposes that. You can go directly to district court, and the state engineer's office acts as an amici on it, and so it can be that big. But the requirements are reporting water quality and reporting water quantity through the NOI, so that still has to be done.
Right, but John, all I'm saying is, without this governor's announcement, without this 500 million, the ability and the requirement to get an approval for a desal well hasn't changed any, with or without this $500 million.
Yeah, I would say that's true. Yeah, that's true.
That's all I was getting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think you're muted, Charlie.
John, don't know if you play baseball, whether you're a good batsman, but here's a curveball for you to swing at. Can you do, and it's not coming from me, it's coming from Dr. Stahl, research professor at New Mexico State, can you do recharge or meet compact requirements using surface discharge with produced water? Swing and a miss. Pick one.
I think I know the answer.
So I'm happy to give you that answer based on current regulation and current guidance. No.
Right. So I guess my deeper question is, what is the state's comprehensive strategy for getting what they want? And what I mean by that is, okay, so you're going to have to kind of parse out brackish water versus produced water, right, in terms of the application. But then you start thinking about produced water and going down that rabbit hole of, okay, this is probably closed loop for hydrogen production. Okay, you're going to take and buy water and sell it to hydrogen producers, but do you have all the pieces you need to develop that economy, and what other components do you need to be doing in parallel, or what other processes do you need to be conducting in parallel in order to achieve your vision? Because I don't think there's any hydrogen off-takers or really large hydrogen off-takers in New Mexico. And so what do we need to be doing there, right? And then how are you leaning on academia to help you? Because New Mexico State, we've got really big projects with existing hydrogen producers. And just things of that nature, right? It's like, how are all these pieces coming together? Where is there a roadmap or a strategy somewhere online that people can read and get informed about and kind of get on the same page?
Sounds good. Good question. And I'm glad we're all clear on the no, you can't use produced water for recharge or anything right now. Not going to happen at this point. But this is exactly why we're looking to industry and trying to incentivize them to come start helping us solve some of these problems and determine what kind of infrastructure needs to be there. Now, I will tell you that at a couple of conferences I've been at, I've been approached by industry, various components of industry saying, hey, what if we had a hydrogen facility here and we could do this with our produced water? And it's like, let's talk, because that's exactly the kind of concept we're looking at. The roadmap that you're talking about, that is what we're looking at having rolled out in the spring to begin starting to look at these proposals and to see what we get coming in. You know, the uses for treated produced water or brackish water, and Mike Hightower could tell you this, one of my big concerns with working through the consortium does a great job, but we have not had industry come forward with what I will call a complete package, right? A treatment train. This is what we can do. This is how we can do it to get to this water quality. We've seen bits and pieces, but now's the time to see what this whole thing can be put together as. And so, yes, we've got some gray area that we're working through. Exactly why we're, going to be engaging groups like this, industry. We want them to be part of the solution. We think that's the smartest, best way to move forward. And I don't know what some of this is going to look like. There's a few reuses to me that are pretty no-brainer. There are others that are going to take a little more work. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I guess I'm just confused. Why is the state wanting industry to tell them what to do versus the state having a comprehensive idea of what needs to be done and then trying to leverage industry to accomplish that goal?
What we're wanting to, so let me say, we've got a pretty good idea of where we need to go. And we've got a real good idea of what we're going to require water to be cleaned up to before we're going to be willing to purchase it. But the reality is that if industry doesn't get involved, if they don't become part of this process, we're not going to get anywhere, right? Because I don't know what's the most cost-effective way for them to do some of this. I can guess, but I don't know that for a fact. There's large pieces of this that we don't know that haven't been shared for various reasons by industry. Right. And I understand a lot of, I came out of private industry, so I understand a lot of those nuances, why you can't share certain things. But the bottom line is they have a need. We have a need. We're looking to meet in the middle, but they're the ones with the resources. They're the ones that, to be quite honest, have the most to gain especially when you're talking about oil and gas, because they're starting to have their backs against the wall with regard to what do you do with this produced water? And so we want them to be part of the solution. We're going to set the guardrails, right? And the reality is I couldn't come up with a list of 3,000 constituents that I require them to sample for and treat for. That may be totally unnecessary and very expensive. But we need to know more about the quality of the water. We know very little, to be quite honest, about what their initial water is that they're treating. We don't have all the information. They don't want to share that. The reality is we can do it the hard way. I can just require them to sample for everything you can think of, and we'll know what's in the water ultimately. but that's not cost effective. And so we're trying to get past this standoff piece and get to a collaborative working relationship that's ultimately beneficial for the citizens of the state of New Mexico and industry, right? Because if we don't come up with a way to continue economic development, and that includes, keeping our current industries going, we lose at the end of the day. So this is going to be a developing piece. I wish I could come to you and tell you, here's this whole program in a box, piece of cake, we start it tomorrow and we're good to go. If I had that kind of stroke, if I had that in my pocket, I probably wouldn't be working where I'm working, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a valuable commodity. Hopefully we get there.
Hey, I heard the question a little differently, Charlie, if you don't mind, because just, talking about the compact issues and Zach brought up some other issues that the state could be interested in. John said what he did, obviously the quality is about most important if we're going to use it for any of those things. But, the state of New Mexico does have a strategic water reserve that was established, and it allows for the state to acquire water rights, and or there's water that can be donated to the strategic water reserve for Endangered Species Act issues or for compact delivery. So ultimately, Zach, I think, as I heard the question, is there is a opportunity for the states to use it in some of those other areas. It's just going to have to get through the process on how it's usable. And I would, for one, like the Mike Hightower to say something here too, possibly, because it's an economic issue also, because if you're going to do thermal distillation process to clean up some really nasty water. And I remember Mike, and you can correct me, Mike, if I don't have these numbers right, but I remember Mike talking about it being $25 to $30 per 1,000 gallons. And the way that becomes essentially marketable within the state, it's an avoided cost because you don't have to deep well inject it. So it's an avoided cost. So it makes some sense, but it's going to be limited to how far you have to deliver that project, where you're treating it, and how far you have to deliver it, right, for it to make economic sense. So I don't know, Mike, can you chime in here on that particular aspect?
So you were right on, John. You remembered everything that I said.
Okay.
So, as usual, you did pretty good. No, I think you're right. The costs are for some of these waters can be pretty high. There may be some avoided costs that can help out on the payment. And so, but to get back to John Rhoderick's point, if the state's willing to, work with companies and provide an opportunity to sell your water or to sell the treated water, if you will, that's an improvement over what we've seen over the last 25 years. So that it begins to set up a market structure that would allow industry to be a player and to look at their opportunities. And so
one question about this. Would it be reasonable to think that if for the movie industry, for every dollar that's spent, our state gives a quarter back? And I'm not quite sure how profitable the state has been with the movie making business yet. Now we've got water, which is the lifeblood of business. Part of that $500 million may go for a period of time to subsidize the cost of production. I think that it's feasible to think that up to 10,000 TDS brackish water can probably be delivered somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 to $7 a 1,000 gallons. It's still higher than what's acceptable, but cable was $25 a month 15 years ago. Today it's $150, and you can live without that. So is there going to be some sensibilities here, John, with the reality of this is new water? It goes back into the environment as clean water, as good water, almost as fresh water. And we're making new water, but there's some startup costs. But the more that it's used, the cheaper it's going to get, right? it's, to me, it's kind of just the flow of business.
Yeah, I think that's the case. It really is. You know, it's trying to apply some real world
business
economic
sense.
practices
Yeah.
to try and get us off. You know, we've been stuck, it seems like, it on top dead center, if you will, for quite a while here, not being able to get moving. And so, you know, this is something that has the potential to get us off that point and begin to make some headway. I don't have a good crystal ball to tell me how it ends up, but you know the one thing I'm sure of is that if we continue to do more of the same that we've been doing all this time, nothing changes, you know, and things get worse. So, you know, from that standpoint, and I'll share a little story. You know, when I left high school or graduated high school over in Grants, I went to work in the uranium mines. And my first job there was as a laborer. And I one day got set to breaking these big rocks on top of the grizzly on the ore chute. You know, they wouldn't fit through it. Grizzly's a big grade if you're not familiar with it. And so I had this double jack sledgehammer and I'm swinging away and I've been beating on this rock for hours, right? And I'm just knocking dust loose and I'm getting nowhere. And this little old man that all he did was haul supplies back and forth. He was bent over. I figured he was probably 100. I don't know how old he was, but he'd been watching me do this as he loaded supplies. And he finally got tired of watching. And he walked over and he just held his hand out and he took that double jack from me and he started walking around that rock and he looked at it, looked under it and walked around it 2 or 3 times. Found a spot, dusted it off a little bit, hauled off and hit that sucker with that double jack and split it into 3 pieces with one hit. And I couldn't believe it. And he turned around, handed the hammer back to me and he says, if you're not getting results hitting it in one spot, find a different spot, right? And so this is the water piece as well. You know, if we're not getting results where we're going, let's hit in a different direction and see if we can't get something happening. You know, never going to guarantee we get it right on the first shot, but if we do nothing, I guarantee we got it wrong. So.
That's right. Let's go ahead
I'd
and
like
call on.
to break off for a minute here. John Hawley's waited patiently for about 15 minutes to pose your questions, so go for it, John.
Now we're going to have to be patient for the question. Go ahead, John. We got another hour. Ask away.
No. Well, everybody here has heard from me. I'm the old geologist. I came out here when I was 20. That was 70 years ago to work in prospecting for uranium.
You're on his pet dinosaur.
So, and then I came to New Mexico State in '62 to start working for the Department of Agriculture. So this is kind of deja vu revisited for me. If I didn't have a severe eye problem, I was supposed to be at that water leaders workshop at Mesilla Dam talking right now about brackish water in the Mesilla Basin. So, but John D'Antonio, there are too many Johns here today. John D'Antonio, really, he's been state engineer. When I first met him, it was with the Department of Environment. He's worn all these hats, and he could write a book about how many times he's been thrown under the bus for doing things that piss people off. I'm sorry, but anyway, John makes a point that. And Bob Feinberg also, when we first met, he was dealing with 12,000 parts per million total dissolved solids, really brackish water in the Forco Valley that he had access to and had great ideas on what to do with it. But what I'm dealing with, my life in the Mesilla Basin, I've got 65 million acre feet of recoverable brackish water in the 1,000 to 5,000 milligram per liter range. A totally different beast as far as what they're desalinating for El Paso in the Hueco boson. So the problem is brackish water in the Mesilla Basin all that whole body of 65 million acre feet, give or take a few million acre feet, is connected with the Rio Grande aquifer. And if you take it, when you start messing with Mother Nature down there, you're starting impacting my pecan grower friends and my chili grower friends and all those people. And so you have to really look out what you wish for. And John Rhoderick, you have my incredible admiration for taking on the job of being cat herder in this generation. So, but I think the problem's been posted now, and it won't be. I've only got only 109 years, so I'm not going to be around to see what happens. Thank you.
Okay, John Grizz, you've been waiting patiently. Time for your question.
Hi, John Rhoderick. So my company makes treatment equipment, and we've been all over the world. And we know people are treating produced water for beneficial use. Why is New Mexico so special? And I mean that in a short bus special way. Why didn't y'all just say we're going to use surface discharge regs from the EPA? Or start with something? It seems like you started from scratch, and everybody else, not everybody, but a lot of states they've been reusing produced water for decades. What makes us so different?
Well, that's a good question. And, part of that I'm going to tell you, I don't know, because we were having these issues before I came on board. One thing that I have found, and I don't know that it's unique to New Mexico, but it's what we've had to deal with, is for whatever reason, the public sentiment associated with produced water has been a little bit unbelievable. And I've had this conversation with Mike, with consortium, and with industry. It's not the science. I know the science is there to treat this stuff. I know the capabilities are there, but we are having to fight a significant battle with public opinion in this state. And, I'm just going to say I've pretty much lived in New Mexico all my life. I've left and come back, and I've dealt with government and with citizens all over the United States. And for whatever reason, it's a little bit different in New Mexico whenever you start going down some of these paths, because you find out real quick who is related to who, and there's not a great appetite sometimes on the part of legislators to support something that's unpopular with their constituents. And sometimes that's not more than 2 or 3 constituents, but they're really vocal. And so a lot of our effort has gone towards and continues to be towards socializing the use of reuse in general, produced water as well. It is, for whatever reason, a lightning rod in this state,
Yeah, but it's really, a few crazies in Santa Fe. If California can do it, what the hell? I mean, in California's attitude is, here's the science, shut the fuck up and sit down.
Yeah, I fully understand that. And there are days I wish we had that kind of stroke here. Unfortunately,
but you couldn't have. You don't think you could have adopted the EPA surface discharge regulations, which is incredibly comprehensive, and said, "Here's the starting point for demo projects or exploration projects"?
We could potentially try to do that. We've tried that with other things. Another, I will say, is unique here in New Mexico is the way we have to go about our rulemaking through the Water Quality Control Commission. When I open up the regulations to propose something, to get something done, it opens up the regulations for anybody and everybody that wants to propose changes to it. And it would not be the first time that we've gone looking for one thing and came away with something entirely different that was not beneficial to anybody. So we have to be very strategic in how we approach things. We have to be very strategic in trying to line up the support where we need it, or at least if I don't have their support, have their willingness to step aside and give us the room to move forward and try some things. It's a chess game, and every move has to be calculated.
It's just,
I'm-
it seems like unnecessary drama. But Friends of the Wild Earth is the bugaboo that we had to deal with last year. They basically tried to protest in the middle of the New Water for New Mexico meeting.
Yep.
And all they do is file lawsuits. And
Yep.
so, to a certain extent, they're not credible. If you ignore the science and say things like, it is impossible to treat produced water, not it's difficult, not it's expensive, but it's just not possible. And this is coming from one of their so-called PhD experts. At some point, the politicians need to ignore those people. And I guess this is my frustration with New Mexico for the last 45 years. So I'll shut up now.
I'm just going to say you're preaching to the choir on a lot of that, John.
Well, an interesting dialogue to say the least. Any last questions for our guest, who's certainly been gracious enough to give us an hour of his time? We certainly ran the gamut here. Going once, going twice. John, we hope this is a very productive effort for the Environment Department as it seeks to streamline and come up with this body of regulations. And please, let's keep the dialogue open between our respective organizations as those regulatory initiatives move forward. Again, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate your time.